Close your eyes, let your breathing slow. Feel the weight of the day ease from your body, from your shoulders, your jaw, the space behind your eyes. You have been carrying things today. You can set them down now. For the next hour, there is nothing you need to hold. Tonight I want to take you to a place that most people in the world have never seen. A place so vast and so silent that the word landscape does not quite cover it. A sea of grass that stretches from horizon to horizon in every direction, rippling in the wind like water, disappearing into distances the eye cannot follow. No trees, no mountains for hundreds of miles in any direction. Just sky, enormous, endless sky. And beneath it, the grass, and beneath the grass, the frozen earth of the Mongolian steppe. The year is approximately 1162. A boy is born in a felt tent somewhere in that ocean of grass. His father is a minor chieftain of a small clan. His name at birth is Temüjin. In the language of his people, it means of iron, or perhaps blacksmith. The word carries both meanings, and both will prove accurate. The people who named him had no way of knowing what the name would come to mean. They had no way of knowing that this child, born in a tent on a cold morning in one of the most sparsely populated places on earth, would go on to conquer more of the world's territory than any human being who had ever lived or who would ever live after him. They had no way of knowing this, because there was nothing about his birth that suggested it. Temujin's world was brutal and uncertain in ways that are difficult to fully imagine from the comfort of where you lie now. The Mongolian steppe in the 12th century was a place of constant violence, shifting alliances, and sudden death. The nomadic tribes who lived there, the Mongols, the Tatars, the Merkits, the Naimans, the Karaits, and dozens of others raided each other constantly. They stole horses and cattle. They took slaves. They formed alliances that lasted a season and dissolved in a season. Loyalties were transactional, always. A powerful man had followers. A weak man had none. There was no law beyond the law of strength, no court to appeal to, no authority that could enforce peace between enemies or protect the defenseless from those stronger than them. A child born into this world understood very early that safety was not a given. Safety was something you built through alliances and relationships and the accumulation of people who owed you something or feared you enough to stand beside you. Without these, you were exposed to everything. Temujin's father, Yesugei, was a man of some standing, not a great Khan, but a man with followers, with horses, with enough influence to matter in the local politics of the steppe. When Temujin was around 9 years old, Yesugei rode with his son to find the boy a bride, as was the custom. He found a suitable girl named Berte from a neighboring clan and left Temujin with her family as a pledge of the betrothal. On his way home, Yesugei stopped to share a meal with a group of Tatars. The Tatars were hereditary enemies of his clan. They recognized him. They poisoned his food. By the time the news reached the camp, Yesugei was dying. Temujin returned to his family. He was 9 years old. His father was dead. And almost immediately the people who had followed Yesugei abandoned the family. They left a widow and her children, Temujin, his brothers, his half-brothers, alone on the steppe with no clan, no protectors, no horses worth speaking of, and a winter coming in fast across the grass. The abandonment was not unusual by the logic of the steppe. A dead chieftain could not protect anyone. His followers needed protection. They went elsewhere. This was simply how the world worked. The widow and her children were unfortunate, but that was not the community's problem to carry. Let that settle for a moment. A 9-year-old boy, the vast grass stretching in every direction, the cold moving in from the north, everything that his father had built dissolved almost overnight because the man who had built it was no longer there to hold it together. Breathe slowly. Feel the surface beneath you. You are warm. You are safe. We are at the very beginning of a story that will take us to the edges of the known world. From this frozen, unpromising beginning, from abandonment and hunger and cold, something will grow that the world will spend 8 centuries trying to understand. We are just beginning. The years that followed were years of pure survival, and they were almost unimaginably hard. Temüjin's family ate what they could find on the steppe: berries, roots, marmots, small fish from the rivers, whatever the land offered to people with nothing. They lived in poverty so extreme that scholars who have studied this period still find it remarkable that any of them survived a single winter, let alone several. The steppe was not a place that tolerated weakness. A family without a clan, without horses, without allies, was a family fully exposed to every predator that the landscape contained. The wolves, the rival tribesmen who saw an unprotected family as an easy target, the simple brutality of cold and hunger. Temüjin learned things during those years that could not have been learned any other way. He learned what real hunger felt like. He learned what cold felt like when there was not enough wood for a fire. He learned the particular quality of desperation that comes from having nothing and knowing that everything you need to survive exists somewhere just out of reach, held by people who have no reason to share it with you. But he also learned something else, something more important than survival technique. He learned that the social order of the steppe, the system of clans and blood obligations and hereditary loyalties that determined who prospered and who starved, was not fixed. It was not inevitable. It was a human construction assembled by people for human reasons, and like all human constructions, it could be broken apart and reassembled differently. When Temüjin was perhaps 13 or 14 years old, he killed his half-brother in a dispute over food. The histories record this moment without sentimentality. It was not a noble act. It was the act of a hungry, frightened boy who could not afford to share. The world he lived in did not reward generosity among the desperate. Around this same time, a rival tribe called the Merkits kidnapped Bertha, the girl he had been pledged to marry. This was not unusual by the standards of the steppe. Women were taken in raids as a matter of course. They were property in a world that treated most people as property. What was unusual was what Temüjin did in response. He asked for help. He went to Togrul, a powerful Khan who had been an ally of his dead father. He went to Jamuka, a childhood companion who had once sworn brotherhood with him in the old nomadic custom, exchanging gifts and pledging loyalty. And together, these 3 men raised a force large enough to attack the Merkits, defeat them, and bring Bertha home. It worked. And in the success of that campaign, something crystallized in Temüjin's understanding of how power actually worked on the steppe. Power did not flow automatically from bloodlines or from the name of your father or from whatever rank you had inherited. Power came from followers. Followers came to the people who gave them what they needed: protection, the prospect of victory, a fair share of whatever was taken. Build enough loyalty, win enough battles, and the followers came. With followers came more power, and with more power came more followers, and the cycle, if managed correctly, had no natural ceiling. He was still a young man, perhaps in his mid-20s. He had a wife, a handful of loyal companions, and a reputation for resourcefulness and determination. He had no army yet. He had no treasury. He had no title beyond the informal respect of a small band of men who had chosen to follow him. But he had understood something, and understanding it was everything. Over the next 2 decades, Temüjin did what no leader on the steppe had managed to do for generations. He unified the Mongol tribes. He brought together clans that had raided and killed each other for as long as anyone could remember. He did it through war, negotiation, and the deliberate construction of a new kind of loyalty, one that went not to a clan, but to a person. He broke the old clan system open. In its place, units of 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, promotion based on ability, not birth. A man who showed courage could rise regardless of who his father was. A man who showed cowardice would be destroyed regardless of how powerful his family had been. In 1206, at a great gathering called a Kurultai on the Onon River, the assembled leaders gave him a new name, Genghis Khan, universal ruler. The wind moved through the grass, the horses stood in their thousands, and the man who had been born in poverty, abandoned on the steppe, sat at the center of it all and received the most powerful name ever given to a human being. The world did not yet know what was about to happen to it. What Genghis Khan built in the years after the Kurultai was not merely an army. It was something more precise than that. A machine designed with the deliberateness of a man who had spent his entire life studying how power worked and how it failed. To understand what he achieved, you first have to understand what military force looked like in the world of 1206. The great settled civilizations that ringed the steppe, the Jin dynasty of northern China to the east, the Khwarezmian Empire of Central Asia and Persia to the west, the Christian kingdoms of Europe far beyond, all had armies. Substantial armies, experienced armies, armies built on centuries of hard-won knowledge about how to fight and how to defend. They had infantry and cavalry and siege equipment. They had walls that had kept nomadic raiders out for generations. The steppe peoples had always been a problem, sometimes a serious problem, occasionally a catastrophic one. But the settled civilizations had always, eventually, absorbed the blow and endured. The Mongol army was different from anything that had come before it. Different in several specific ways, each of which mattered, and all of which together produced something that the world had no existing framework to understand. The first difference was speed. Every Mongol soldier was a mounted archer, and every mounted archer traveled with multiple horses, typically 3 to 5 animals per man. This meant that a Mongol army could cover distances that left their enemies stunned. A force that their opponents had placed 10 days away could appear in 3. Cavalry forces that depended on a single horse per soldier, infantry forces that moved at walking pace, these could not respond to an army that moved like water, appearing from directions that should have been impossible, attacking and withdrawing before a defense could form. The Mongols did not fight the wars their enemies prepared for. They fought a different war entirely. The second difference was discipline, and this was perhaps the most important. Most armies of this period were difficult to command at a distance. In the chaos and noise of battle, orders did not transmit reliably. units lost cohesion. What began as a coordinated force devolved, often quickly, into individual combats that went to whoever was strongest or luckiest. The Mongol reorganization into decimal units, 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, created a command structure that could function under stress, at long range, without constant supervision. Generals knew what was expected of them. Soldiers knew their roles. In the confusion of battle, where most armies of the period fell apart, the Mongol force held together, shifted, adapted, kept its shape. The third difference was intelligence. Before Genghis Khan committed his forces to any major campaign, he sent scouts, not simply to count enemy soldiers, but to understand the terrain in detail, to map water sources and mountain passes and road conditions in different seasons, to gather political intelligence about which local rulers resented their overlords and might switch sides, about which cities were fortified and which were not, about the morale of the populations he intended to face. The Mongols arrived knowing far more about their enemies than their enemies knew about them. The fourth difference was adaptability. The traditional weakness of nomadic armies had always been the walls. You could defeat an enemy's army in open battle and still lose the campaign if the enemy's cities were fortified and you couldn't take them. The Mongols solved this problem by recruiting specialists. Chinese engineers who understood how to build and operate catapults, Persian engineers who understood siege techniques, experts in the diversion of water supplies. They absorbed the military technology of every civilization they conquered and turned it against the next one. And the fifth difference, perhaps the most powerful of all, was the deliberate use of terror as a strategic instrument. The cheapest victory is the one where the enemy does not fight. A city that surrendered cost him nothing. A city that resisted cost him soldiers and time. And so he developed a policy of absolute clarity. Submit and be spared. Your people put to productive use within the empire. Resist and the city will be destroyed. Completely. As a message, he enforced this without exception, and word traveled ahead of his armies. Cities heard what happened to the cities that fought. Many opened their gates, but some did not. And when they did not, the Mongols kept their word. Let the silence hold. You are somewhere warm and still. The machine is assembled. The campaigns are about to begin. The first great test came from China. The Jin dynasty ruled northern China from a network of fortified cities, with an army that numbered in the hundreds of thousands and walls that had been built and maintained for centuries specifically to stop the people of the steppe. The Jin had dominated the Mongols for generations, extracting tribute, playing the tribes against one another, funding some clans to attack others, deliberately keeping the steppe fractured and weak. In some sense, the violence and poverty that had shaped Temüjin's childhood was partly a product of Jin policy. The steppe was kept barbaric because a barbaric steppe was easier to manage than a united one. In 1211, Genghis Khan invaded. What followed was not a quick campaign. The Jin Empire was vast. Hundreds of fortified cities, millions of soldiers, terrain that favored the defense. The Mongols were at their best in open battle, where their speed and discipline and archery dominated. Against prepared positions, against walls, even with their recruited engineers, they were fighting a much harder fight. They could destroy the surrounding countryside. They could cut supply lines. They could take the smaller cities and leave the larger ones surrounded and isolated. but total conquest would take years. It took years, and Genghis Khan was patient in a way that only a man who had spent decades working toward a single goal could be patient. He did not need to take every city. He needed to demonstrate clearly and repeatedly that no defensive system was sufficient to stop him. Each campaign added to the impression. Each fallen city sent its message to the cities that had not yet fallen. By 1215, the Jin capital, the city that would eventually become Beijing, fell. The Jin dynasty itself would not be fully destroyed until decades later, under his successors. But the principle had been demonstrated. The walls were not enough. The armies were not enough. Nothing that the most sophisticated military civilization in the known world could assemble was sufficient against what the steppe had produced. In the years that followed, Genghis Khan turned west. The Khwarezmian Empire was one of the great powers of the Islamic world, a vast state covering what is now Iran, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, and much of Central Asia, ruled by a Shah named Muhammad II, who had, in the years before the Mongols arrived, built himself into one of the most powerful rulers in the region. He had conquered widely, suppressed rivals, established himself as a major force in the politics of the Islamic world. He made a catastrophic mistake. A Khwarezmian governor, acting on the Shah's implicit authorization or explicit order, sources disagree, seized a large Mongol trade caravan, executed the merchants, and took their goods. Genghis Khan responded by sending ambassadors to demand explanation and reparation. The Shah had the ambassadors killed. This was the kind of miscalculation from which no recovery was possible. Genghis Khan spent approximately a year preparing. He assembled his armies, gathered intelligence, mapped the routes, planned the logistics. Then he moved west with a force that contemporary sources estimate at somewhere between 100,000 and 200,000 men. Precise numbers are impossible, but the scale was unlike anything the region had seen. He did something that should have been impossible. He crossed the Karakum Desert. The desert was considered impassable for a force of that size. It was not passable by ordinary armies dependent on conventional supply lines. The Mongols had prepared for it. They had mapped the water sources. They carried what they needed. They endured what ordinary soldiers could not endure. They emerged from the desert behind the Khwarezmian defensive lines, between the cities and their interior supply routes, in positions that the Shah had never prepared to defend because he had never believed they could be approached from that direction. Samarkand, one of the great cities of the medieval world, a center of Islamic learning and commerce and culture that had existed for 2,000 years, a city of perhaps 500,000 people, fell in 1220. The population was largely spared. The garrison that had chosen to fight was not. The Shah fled westward and died alone on a small island in the Caspian Sea, his empire gone, hunted to his last breath by a Mongol pursuit force that never stopped moving. Breathe. Let the breath be slow and full. You are safe. You are still. The rivers of history run quietly past in the dark. There is a shadow that falls across this story and cannot be avoided. The Mongol campaigns destroyed cities and killed people on a scale that is difficult to fully absorb. The cities that resisted, and some did resist, with courage and desperation, knowing what was coming, were dealt with according to the policy that had been stated and enforced from the beginning. Merv, one of the largest and most prosperous cities in the medieval Islamic world, with a population that scholars estimate at perhaps 500,000, was taken in 1221 and its population massacred over several days. Nishapur, a major cultural center, was destroyed so thoroughly that later travelers reported the ruins were barely recognizable as having been a city. Baghdad, the seat of the Abbasid Caliphate, the intellectual capital of the Islamic world, a city that held the greatest libraries and the most advanced scholarship of its age, was sacked by Genghis Khan's grandson Hulagu in 1258, the libraries destroyed, the caliph killed, the irrigation systems broken. The numbers given in medieval sources are almost certainly exaggerated. Medieval chroniclers had a habit of multiplying death tolls by factors that would make modern statisticians wince. But even accounting for this, the scale of destruction was real. Agricultural systems built over centuries, the underground aqueducts that made Persia productive, the irrigation networks of Central Asia that had sustained dense populations for 1,000 years, were damaged or destroyed, and in some cases never fully rebuilt. Regions that had been prosperous and densely populated in 1200 were near empty a generation later. Some historians estimate that the population of Iran did not recover to its pre-Mongol level until the 20th century. These things are true and they must be said plainly. And yet, something else was also happening, simultaneously, which does not cancel the destruction but exists alongside it with full complexity. Genghis Khan was not interested in destruction as an end in itself. He was interested in power, and he understood, with the practicality of a man who had grown up with nothing, that a destroyed city produced nothing for him. A living city produced tribute, goods, soldiers, administrators, artisans, merchants. A merchant who traveled through his territory once was worth something. A merchant who could travel safely, who knew the roads and the relay stations and the laws, who could count on Mongol protection from one end of the empire to the other, was worth infinitely more. And so, alongside the violence, he built. The yam was one of the great administrative achievements of the medieval world, a postal and relay system that eventually covered the empire from Korea to Persia. A network of stations, each one a day's hard ride from the last, stocked with fresh horses and food and accommodation. Official riders carrying a special tablet of authority could cross the entire empire in weeks rather than months. News traveled at a speed that contemporary observers found almost incomprehensible. Reports from the far end of the empire could reach the Khan's court faster than anything the settled civilizations of Europe or the Middle East could match. Trade moved along the same routes as the official messengers, protected by the same system. The Mongol law, the great yasa, applied everywhere within the empire's borders. Religious tolerance was mandated. Merchants could travel with a reasonable expectation of safety. Caravans that had previously required armed escorts and paid tolls to multiple rulers could now move under Mongol safe conduct from one end of the continent to the other. What historians would later call the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, was real, within its limits. A traveler could move from the Pacific coast of China to the Black Sea without crossing a hostile border. Marco Polo, a generation after Genghis Khan's death, would do exactly this, and his account would be disbelieved by Europeans as too fantastical. It was not fantastical. It was the product of a world briefly held together by a single extraordinary will. Goods moved along those roads: silk, spices, porcelain, ideas, technologies, and eventually, though no one planned it, disease. The plague bacterium that traveled west along Mongol trade routes and arrived in Europe in 1347 as the Black Death, killing a third of the continent's population in a decade. Connection does not discriminate between what passes through it. Let your body be heavy now. The great campaigns are behind us. What lies ahead is quieter. The final years of a life that had asked everything of its owner and received everything in return. Genghis Khan never stopped. In his 60s, old by the standards of a man who had spent his entire adult life on horseback, in battle, crossing deserts and steppes in every season, he was still campaigning. The Western Jia dynasty of northwestern China had submitted to him years earlier and then rebelled. In 1226, he led the campaign himself, not because he needed to. His generals were capable, his sons were capable, but he had never been a man who could stay still, and the Western Xia rebellion was an insult he intended to address personally. The campaign was successful. The Western Xia would be destroyed before it was over, but Genghis Khan would not live to see it completed. In August of 1227, somewhere in the field, the campaign still underway, he died. The cause is genuinely uncertain. Medieval sources disagree among themselves, and none of them are reliable in the way a modern observer would want them to be. Chinese sources say one thing, Persian sources say another. The later Mongol chronicles, written generations after the fact, say a third. Some say he was wounded by an arrow during a hunt. Some say he fell from his horse in a raid. Some say illness, the accumulated injuries of decades catching up with him at last, the fever of some infection that his body, after 65 years of extraordinary use, could no longer fight off. We do not know. We will probably never know. What is certain is what he asked for. He asked to be buried in secret. No monument, no marker that any traveler could find and identify. The location of his grave was to be known to no one outside the smallest possible circle of the most trusted people, and even they were not to speak of it. According to the traditions that were passed down, and these traditions are consistent across multiple sources, which gives them some weight, everyone who witnessed the burial procession was killed. The soldiers who escorted the body, the servants who prepared the site. Whoever was there was silenced. Then horses were driven across the gravesite to trample the disturbed earth back to flatness, to erase any trace of digging, to make the location indistinguishable from any other patch of the vast Mongolian steppe. He had spent his entire life building something visible, the largest contiguous land empire in the history of the world, 40 million square kilometers, more of the Earth's surface than any other conqueror had ever held. And at the end, he chose invisibility. No pyramid, no tomb, no city named after him, the grass and the wind and the unmarked ground. People have been looking for his grave for 800 years. The searches have been serious and well-funded. Archaeologists have gone over the likely region with ground-penetrating radar and satellite imaging. Aerial surveys have been conducted. Hundreds of potential sites have been investigated. None of them have yielded anything conclusive. The steppe is very large. 8 centuries of wind and weather and the slow movement of the earth have done their work. Whatever was put into the ground in August of 1227 has been well hidden by time. It may never be found. The man who conquered the world asked only for the grass and the sky, and the grass and the sky, it seems, have kept his secret faithfully. Think about what that means for a moment. Every other conqueror of comparable scale left something visible. The pyramids of Egypt, the ruins of Persepolis, the columns of Rome that still stand in forums across the Mediterranean. Even the wall that the Chinese built to keep his ancestors out still runs along the northern horizon for thousands of miles, a scar across the landscape that can be seen from a considerable altitude. Monuments endure. That is their purpose. Genghis Khan chose no monument. He chose no marker, no inscription, no palace built to outlast him. He chose to vanish into the steppe as completely as the steppe eventually swallows everything. The wind blows, the grass grows, the seasons turn. Whatever was placed in the ground in 1227 is part of the ground now, and the ground keeps nothing separate from itself for very long. There is something quietly profound about this. A man who changed the world more than almost any other individual who ever lived, asking at the end to be left alone by it, to become indistinguishable from the landscape that made him, to return. Breathe now. Let the breath go long and slow. Outside, wherever you are, the night is doing what nights do, moving through its quiet hours, carrying everything and holding nothing, indifferent and patient in the way that only the very old and the very large can be. What did he leave behind? The question is both simple and impossible to answer simply. The empire he built did not survive intact. It could not have. Nothing that large, that dependent on a single extraordinary will, could hold together once that will was removed. His sons divided it according to Mongol custom. His grandsons divided it further. What had been one became several. The Yuan dynasty in China, under Kublai Khan, who would receive Marco Polo at his court and preside over one of the most sophisticated civilizations of the medieval world. The Ilkhanate in Persia and the Middle East, which would become a patron of Persian art and science and learning, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, the Golden Horde on the Russian steppe, which would dominate Russian political life for 2 centuries and leave its mark on the Russian language and culture that is still visible today. Each of these successor states developed its own character. The Mongol rulers became, over time, absorbed into the cultures they had conquered. They converted to the religions of their subjects, Buddhism in China, Islam in Persia and Central Asia. They became patrons of the arts they had once destroyed. The grandchildren of men who had burned libraries became collectors of books. The Pax Mongolica, that window of relative stability across Eurasia, lasted perhaps a century before the fracturing of the empire made it unsafe again. But in that century, the volume of trade and cultural exchange across the continent was extraordinary by the standards of any previous era. Some historians believe that the transmission of specific technologies from China to the West, printing, paper money, gunpowder, the compass, was significantly accelerated by the Mongol connections. Whether or not these technologies would eventually have traveled westward anyway, they traveled faster and more directly because of the roads and the safety that the Mongols had briefly imposed. And there is this, which is perhaps the most vivid single fact about the legacy of this one man. Genetic studies conducted in the early 21st century found that approximately 16 million men alive today carry a Y chromosome that traces to a single ancestor who lived in Mongolia approximately 1,000 years ago. 1 in every 200 men on Earth. The pattern of distribution, found across a vast swathe of territory from the Pacific to the Caspian, matches the geography of the Mongol conquests almost exactly. The inference, while it cannot be stated as certain fact, is powerful. The most reproductively successful human being in all of recorded history was almost certainly Genghis Khan. A boy born in a felt tent on the steppe, his father poisoned, his family abandoned by their entire community. Every early disadvantage the world could impose piled upon a single child before he reached his teens. And from that beginning, something that changed the shape of the world, the trajectory of civilizations, and the genetic makeup of the human species itself. History does not always give us stories that make sense, that show a clear line between cause and effect, that arrive at a moral we can hold comfortably. Sometimes it gives us this: a life that contains extreme violence and extreme creation, terror and order, destruction and connection, all bound up together in the same decades, the same decisions, the same person. We hold it without resolving it, because that is what history asks of us. History gives us what happened and leaves the judgment to us. A person whose ancestors lived in Samarkand in 1220 will feel this story differently than a person whose ancestors traded along the Silk Road in the century of the Pax Mongolica. Both responses are real. Both are earned. The steppe does not judge. The grass grows back. The cities that fell were eventually rebuilt, some of them in different forms, by people with no direct memory of what stood there before. Everything passes. Even the consequences of the most extreme violence eventually transform into something so different that the connection becomes almost invisible. But some things persist. The roads, the connections, the 16 million men alive today who carry his genetics without knowing it. The words that entered European languages from the Mongol world, Khan, horde, carrying the memory of those centuries in their sounds. The world as it is was made in part by what happened between 1206 and 1227. Let the breath be slow and full. You have traveled very far tonight. The story is nearly done. In the last years of his life, Genghis Khan did something that says more about him than almost any of the campaigns. He invited a Taoist monk named Chuji to come and see him. This was not a casual invitation. Chuji lived in China, thousands of miles from where the Khan's campaigns were taking him. To reach the Khan, the monk would need to travel across Central Asia, through the aftermath of the Khwarezmian campaign, across terrain that had recently been a battlefield. He was in his 70s. The journey would take years. He made it, and when he arrived, Genghis Khan received him with courtesy and genuine curiosity. What the Khan wanted to know was whether the monk possessed knowledge of immortality. A technique, a medicine, a practice that could extend a human life beyond its natural limits. The question was not unreasonable given who was asking it. Genghis Khan had been told by many of the people around him whatever they thought he wanted to hear. If any man on earth might be believed to have discovered an exception to the rule of death, it was a Taoist monk famous throughout China for his scholarship and his spiritual attainments. Chuji told him the truth. There was no such thing, no technique, No medicine, no practice could make a human being immortal. The lifespan was what it was. What a person could do was live wisely, avoid excess, cultivate the spirit, attend to what actually mattered. That was the best that could be hoped for. The monk said this clearly without softening it to the most powerful man in the world. Genghis Khan listened carefully. He sat with the answer. And then he said, in words that were recorded by the monk's disciples and have survived in the historical record, "I appreciate your honesty. Most people tell me what I want to hear. He let the monk go free. He gave him gifts. He issued a decree protecting Taoist monasteries throughout the empire from taxation and from the demands of conscription." This small moment, a conqueror and a monk in a tent on the edge of Central Asia, the question of mortality hanging between them, is one of the details that historians return to. Because it is so human. A man at the end of an extraordinary life, surrounded by the evidence of what extraordinary power can accomplish and what it cannot, asking whether there is a way to stay, being told, gently but plainly, that there is not, accepting the answer with the same practicality that had characterized everything else he did. He did not find immortality. Nobody does. But the conversation is worth holding for a moment because of what it reveals. Here is a man who has spent 60+ years operating entirely in the external world, fighting, building, commanding, moving, always moving. His entire existence, since the age of 9, has been organized around the accumulation and exercise of power over things outside himself. And here, at the end, he is asking a monk who has spent decades cultivating the inner life whether the outer life can be made to last a little longer. The monk says no, but here is what can be done. And Genghis Khan listens. He does not dismiss the answer. He does not have the monk killed for delivering disappointing news, the way rulers of his type sometimes did. He sits with it. He accepts it. He lets the monk go with gifts. There is something in this exchange that feels like a man making his peace with a fact that had always been true and that he had been, perhaps, too occupied to look at directly until now. The world is finite. Lives are finite. The empire is not immortal. Nothing is immortal. The grass grows back. The campaigns continued after the monk left. The empire expanded. The reports came in from every direction. Victories, submissions, the ongoing management of a system that stretched across a continent. He dealt with each day's business as it came, because there was always business, and there was always another day, until there was not. The grass on the steppe moves in the wind the same way it has always moved. The sky above Mongolia is the same sky that arched over the Kurultai in 1206, the same sky that watched the armies march west across the deserts, the same sky that stretched overhead in August of 1227, when the greatest conqueror who ever lived lay down for the last time and did not rise. What changes is what moves beneath the sky. What remains is the sky itself, patient and enormous and indifferent and, in its way, kind. Breathe. Let the story settle into you like warmth after cold. There is nothing left to hold on to. Only the stillness and the quiet and the dark that comes next. Before this story rests, I want to stay for a moment with the place itself. The Mongolian steppe is not like other landscapes. People who have traveled there, who have driven for hours across it, or ridden horses across it, or walked across it in the long evening light, describe a feeling that is difficult to name. Something between solitude and vastness, between peace and exposure. The sky is not merely large, it is total. It fills every direction. There is no city on the horizon, no hill to interrupt the view, no shelter from the full weight of the sky above you. Underneath that sky, you are very small, but in a way that is not frightening, in a way that is, if you stay with it, something close to restful. People still live on the Mongolian steppe the way their ancestors lived 800 years ago. They move with their herds through the seasons, following the grass, living in round felt tents called gers that can be assembled and disassembled in an hour. Their children ride horses before they can walk steadily. Their relationship to the land is direct and ancient and unmediated by the walls and the machines and the 10,000 layers of infrastructure that most people in the world today live inside of without thinking about it. In the evenings, when the temperature drops fast after sunset, the way it does at altitude, and the wind comes down across the grass, and the last light goes from the western sky, the stars appear in numbers that city dwellers never see. The Milky Way is not a faint smear. It is a river, bright and dense and close, spanning the full arc of the sky from one horizon to the other. And beneath that sky, somewhere in those hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of grass and wind and frozen earth, the man who built the largest empire in human history is buried in a place that no one has ever found. It is a strange thing to hold in the mind. The scale of what he built, 40 million square kilometers, more of the Earth's surface than any other ruler has ever held. A system of roads and laws and relay stations that connected the Pacific to the Mediterranean. A military machine that defeated every army that ever stood against it, set against the smallness of a single grave, unmarked, hidden, returning slowly and completely to the earth. He asked for no monument. He left no autobiography. He could not write. He learned to read as an adult, but the written word was not the medium of his world. What we know of him comes through the accounts of his subjects and his enemies, and the descendants who mythologized him over the centuries that followed. He passed through the world, leaving behind everything, and a record of almost nothing personal, almost nothing internal, almost nothing that lets us see clearly what it felt like to be him. There is only the life, the arc of it, the boy in the tent, the decades of war, the empire assembled out of the steppe as if by sheer force of will, the monk and the question about immortality and the honest answer accepted without flinching, and then the grass and the wind and the silence. Let that image rest with you now, the grass moving in the dark, the stars overhead, the vast, patient, indifferent sky. There is something in that image that belongs to everyone who has ever lain awake at night and felt both the smallness of a single life and the strange largeness of the fact of being alive at all. You are here. You are breathing. Beneath whatever sky is above you, whatever season is outside, whatever the world has brought you through today, that fact is present and whole and real. The steppe teaches a certain kind of humility. Not the humility of defeat, but the humility that comes from being very small beneath something very large and not finding that smallness to be a problem. The sky does not judge the size of the thing beneath it. The grass is the same whether a warlord rides over it or a child. The wind is the same. There is a freedom in that, if you let yourself feel it. The enormous indifference of the world is from a certain angle a kind of rest. You do not have to be more than you are. The sky does not require it. Genghis Khan was buried in the grass he had ridden across his whole life, not in a palace, not beneath a monument, in the grass, where the horses run and the wind moves and the seasons do their work without anyone's permission. 800 years later, you are lying somewhere warm and still, and the same grass is growing somewhere on the other side of the world, under the same sky, beneath the same patient stars. That is enough. Let the story go now. Let it settle like sediment in still water, slowly, without effort, to the bottom of the dark. The Mongolian steppe at night is one of the darkest places on earth. No cities for 500 miles in any direction. No roads lit up from above. No glow on the horizon. Just the grass, the cold, the sound of the wind, and above it all, the stars in numbers that take the breath away. The Milky Way stretched from one edge of the sky to the other, white and dense and close, the light of 10 billion suns falling silently on the empty grass. Somewhere beneath that light, somewhere in those hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of silence, the man who changed the world is at rest. 800 years of wind have smoothed the ground above him. 800 years of seasons have come and gone across that sky. The grass grows and goes dry and grows again. The horses pass through. The nomads move with their herds through the long summers and the hard winters. The children of the steppe ride as they have always ridden, free under the enormous sky. Nothing marks the place. Nothing will ever mark the place. He asked for this. He chose it. The man who could have had any monument, any tomb, any city named after him, and kept his name alive for 1,000 years in carved stone, asked for nothing but the grass and the sky. After a lifetime of making the world pay attention to him, after forcing the attention of 25 million people, after making the Jin Emperor flee, after making the Khwarezmian Shah run until he died on an island in the Caspian, he asked for disappearance, for the right to become indistinguishable from the landscape he came from. There is something in that which belongs to sleep, something that understands that the rest at the end of a long day and the rest at the end of a long life are not so different in their essence. Both are the same letting go. Both are the same surrender to the dark that holds us. There is nothing to fight here, nothing to build, nothing to defend. Only the dark and the warmth and the breath, slower now, almost imperceptibly slower, each cycle a little longer than the last. Let your body be heavy. Let it be fully held by whatever surface is beneath you. Feel the weight of your arms, your legs, the back of your head. Feel the breath coming in and going out without effort, the body doing what it has always known how to do, without your help, without your oversight, in the dark. History is full of people who wanted to last forever, who built things large enough, visible enough, permanent enough that time could not erase them. The pyramids, the great walls, the cathedrals, the columns with their names still legible after 2,000 years. And even these, the most durable of them, are slowly going, grain by grain, back to the elements they were made from. Everything is temporary. The question is only how long. Genghis Khan conquered more of the world than anyone before or after. He changed the course of civilizations. His genetics run in the bodies of 16 million living men. And what he asked for, in the end, was a quiet place in the grass where no one would ever look for him. There is something in that which rhymes with what you are doing right now. Putting down the day. releasing the thoughts that have been circling, letting the body go heavy and still, and trust the dark to hold it. Sleep is its own kind of return, to something before the noise, before the effort, before the long work of being a person in the world. Every night, the same letting go. Every morning, the same return. The man who conquered the world understood at the end that even the most extraordinary life must come to rest. He asked for the grass and the sky. He asked to become once more indistinguishable from the steppe that made him. Let your thoughts slow now. Let them become less sharp. Let them pass through the mind the way weather passes, changing shape, moving on, leaving the sky clear behind them. Outside, wherever you are, the night is doing what the night has always done, moving through its hours, holding the world in its quiet. The stars above Mongolia are very bright. The grass moves in the wind. The horses stand with their heads down in the cold. The fire in the tent has burned low. Somewhere a child is sleeping. You are warm. You are still. You have done enough today. Let the dark come in like water, slowly filling the low places first, then rising, quiet and complete, until there is nothing left but the rest you have been moving toward all day. The steppe is silent. The sky is full of light. And now, softly, the last edge of waking fades. Let it go. Let it go. Let go.